Let me start by saying I've always loved road trips. There's something about hitting the open road, listening to music, and just driving for hours, no destination in mind. Sometimes I'll do it just for fun, and other times, if it turns into a multi-day trip, I'll end up spending the night in a cheap motel. It's usually a weekend thing with my dog Scout tagging along. A few nights ago, I decided to take another trip. This time, I left later than usual, and as the night wore on, I started getting tired. I knew I wouldn't make it to the next town, let alone my house, if I kept going. The road I was on was surrounded by thick woods, so when I saw a clearing in the trees, I decided to pull off. I wasn't planning on sleeping in the car, but honestly, I wasn't sure if it was legal to park there or not. So, I drove deeper into the woods, hoping to find a spot far enough off the road where I wouldn't be seen. Eventually, I couldn't see the highway anymore. I let Scout out to stretch his legs and do his business, then reclined my seat all the way back, figuring I could catch a few hours of sleep. Once Scout jumped back in, I locked the doors and settled in. To describe where I parked, it was in a clearing opposite a small cabin, but not directly in front of it. There were plenty of trees around, so I didn't feel like I was invading anyone's space. Plus, the cabin looked abandoned. There were no lights on, and it was old and worn down, like it hadn't been lived in for years. I figured I was fine, even if someone did still own it. After a few minutes, I started to drift off, and I must have been asleep for a few hours when I woke up to Scout softly growling under his breath. I froze listening. What was it? I couldn't hear anything at first, but then I caught the sound of footsteps outside the car, slow and deliberate. Just then, a sharp, high-pitched scratching sound scraped along the side of my car. Scout went crazy, barking nonstop. My heart started racing. I turned on the headlights, hoping to see what was out there. And there he was. A very tall man in his 40s or 50s, dragging something along the ground as he circled my car. At first, I thought it was a stick or a rock, but it looked more like a key or a large metal object. He was moving slowly, almost deliberately. I couldn't tell if he saw me, but it felt like he was staring right at me the whole time. There was a wicked grin on his face. Something about it was just off. My body went ice cold. I wasn't sure what he wanted, but I knew I needed to get out of there fast. I quickly adjusted my seat and started the engine, ready to drive away. But just as I was about to shift into gear, he moved to the front of my car, blocking the way. All around me there were trees. The only way out was through him. I panicked, slammed on the horn, and shouted out the window, "What do you want?" Scout's barking was deafening, but the man didn't flinch. Instead, he started walking toward my driver's side door. I could see now that he was holding something in his hand, a large butcher's knife. He was coming closer. I knew I had to act fast, but I was paralyzed with fear. I looked around, searching for an escape, but there was none. Finally, as he was nearly at my door, I made my move. I jammed the car into drive and slammed the accelerator. The tires spun for a moment on the dirt, but then I broke free, speeding back toward the highway. I didn't stop driving until I got home. The next day, I went outside to check the damage to my car. The paint on one side was completely ruined, deep scratches and gouges, like someone had scraped it repeatedly with a sharp object. I have no idea if that guy was trying to teach me a lesson for parking too close to his cabin, or if he even owned the property. Maybe he was just crazy. But I'll tell you this, I won't ever sleep in my car again, especially not in some remote area like that. There's just something about being stuck, trapped in a place where you can't get away, that I'll never forget. A few months ago, I decided to make a road trip to support a friend who was running the New York City Marathon. I was driving from Pittsburgh to New York, and to get there, I had to take Route 90, the longest interstate highway in the US. I'm not a fan of flying, so I figured I'd just drive. I left around 4 p.m. after finishing work, and my GPS said it would take about 14 hours, which meant I'd get there around 6 a.m., maybe 5 a.m. if I didn't make too many stops. I'm the type of person who likes to power through long drives without many breaks. Just get it done, you know? I'd been on the road for about 10 hours, and by 1 a.m., I was nearly alone on the highway. There was almost no traffic, just the open road stretching for miles in front of me. I had music cranked up to keep me awake and keep my mind busy. I had a couple of coffee cups, but I could feel myself getting a little tired, even though I didn't want to stop for more caffeine. The thought of getting to my hotel and collapsing into a bed kept me going. Then I noticed something strange. 1 minute, I was alone on the highway. The next, I saw headlights in my rearview mirror. A car had pulled up behind me, and it was following too closely. I shifted into the right lane to give him more room, but he sped up, matching my speed. Then he stayed right on my tail. I tried speeding up to pass him, but the second I got ahead of him, he matched my speed again and slid into my lane, right behind me. It felt like he was trying to intimidate me or force me to race him. I wasn't about to get into a road rage situation, especially this late at night, so I decided to speed up even more to get some distance between us. But as I accelerated, so did he. I swerved into the left lane, and again he followed. Now I knew something was off. It couldn't be a cop. It was some beat-up old pickup truck. Then the truck's headlights started flashing, like he was trying to signal me. I didn't slow down. I was scared, honestly. I had no idea what was going on, but it wasn't normal. I pressed the gas harder, trying to pick up speed and pass any other cars or cops, but the highway was empty. There was nothing but the occasional car flying past on the opposite side. Then, the truck switched lanes and floored it. I heard the growl of his engine as he sped up and passed me. He swerved in front of me, cutting me off, and then slammed on his brakes. I had no choice but to slam on mine too, just to avoid hitting him. I started honking like crazy, but it didn't do anything. The truck's hazards went on, and the driver started waving his arm out the window, signaling for me to pull over. I wasn't about to stop for some stranger in the middle of nowhere. I saw my chance, pulled around him, and floored it. My car was faster, but the truck wasn't giving up. Even at 100 miles per hour, he was still right behind me. I took the first exit I could find, hoping to lose him in town. I stopped at a red light at the end of the exit ramp, expecting to be safe. But the pickup truck pulled up right behind me. I glanced over at the truck, and the window rolled down. Inside were 3 men wearing creepy white masks, like something out of a horror movie. They stared at me, not saying a word, just watching. I was in full panic mode by then. I blew the red light and raced down the main road, finally seeing other cars around. The pickup truck stopped following me right as I entered the city limits. At that point, I was convinced I was going to be killed. It felt way more than just some road rage incident. I never got a good look at the truck's plate. In fact, I'm not sure I even saw one. It was an old black pickup, probably from the 90s, but that was all I could remember. I ended up pulling into a Walmart parking lot, exhausted, and just fell asleep in my car. When I woke up around 8 a.m., I finished the drive without another incident. When I told my friend about what happened, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had narrowly escaped something terrible. I'm just thankful I didn't stop and let them get any closer. I always tell people to be extra careful when driving late at night, especially on isolated roads. You never know what kind of crazy you might run into. This happened during the holiday season of 2017. At the time, I was in my second year of university, and since my campus was only about an hour away from my parents' place, I still lived at home to save some money on rent. Every year, my family would make the long drive to visit relatives in the next state over. It was a tradition. We'd leave early on Friday morning to avoid the traffic, but this year, I had a final exam to finish up, so I had to drive down later that evening on my own. I left my house around 8 p.m., and by that time, it was already pitch black outside. The highway I was driving on was eerily quiet, with very little civilization around. I remember driving for about an hour when my car started making a strange noise, like a weird sputtering sound, but I figured it was just the engine acting up, as it sometimes did. I tried to ignore it, but soon enough, the car started slowing down. No matter how much I pressed on the gas pedal, it felt like the car just wasn't responding. That's when it hit me. I had run out of gas. I had meant to fill up before leaving, but in all the rush with finals and everything, I completely forgot. And of course, the gas light was broken, so I had no warning. Thankfully, I remembered a small town just 20 minutes away, and I knew there was a 24-hour gas station there. At least it wasn't the middle of nowhere. I grabbed a gas container from the trunk, locked up my car, and started walking toward the town. The walk felt long, but I finally got to the station, filled up the canister, and started my way back. When I returned to my car, I quickly filled it up, got in, and started the engine. That's when I saw him. A man, maybe in his 40s or 50s, was standing about 50 feet ahead of me on the road. No car, just this guy who had appeared out of nowhere, seemingly coming from the same direction I had just walked. I froze for a moment. My immediate thought was to drive away, but he was leaning on the hood of my car, and I didn't want to hit him if I made a hasty move. So, I rolled down my window just a crack to see what he wanted. He immediately gestured for me to roll it down further. "Hey, can you give me a ride? My car broke down just up the road," he said. His voice had this kind of urgency to it, but something felt off. I had just walked down that very stretch of road, and I hadn't seen any broken down cars. Sorry man, I gotta go," I replied, trying to keep the conversation short. There was a pause, and then he went on about how he was feeling exhausted and asked if I could at least give him some water. I wasn't sure what to do. I figured it would be quick, so I reached over to my glove compartment and grabbed a bottle of water. As I handed it to him, he moved closer to the window. I could feel the tension rise. As soon as he was close enough, I saw my chance. I slammed the gas pedal down, and my tires screeched as I sped off, hoping to get away quickly. But as I pulled away, I heard a horrifying sound, a long, grating scrape along the side of my car, like metal on metal. I looked in my rearview mirror and saw the man running after me for a short distance before he gave up. I didn't look back again. I just kept driving. When I finally arrived at my cousin's house, I was still shaken. As I got out of the car, I noticed something that sent a chill down my spine. The entire side of my car was scratched up, like something sharp had dragged across it. It wasn't just a little scrape. It looked deliberate, like a knife or some kind of blade had been used. I reported the incident to the police, but nothing ever came of it. They couldn't find anyone matching the man's description or any evidence linking him to the area. To this day, I firmly believe he had followed me from the gas station back to my car. I never saw any car parked by the side of the road, and he was way too close to have just appeared by chance. It still creeps me out to think about what might have happened if I hadn't driven off when I did. Ever since then, I've been more cautious about driving alone, especially at night in remote areas. You never know who's lurking in the shadows.